care that has not been as robust as someone in situational poverty.
I was just joking, are there 7 different definitions of intergenerational poverty? What I just wanted to say about this is that my organization primarily deals with homelessness, and by definition, people who are homeless are poor, pretty much. I think intergenerational poverty is any family that's experiencing poverty, anybody who has children or a grandparent, anybody who's of more than one generation in a family is intergenerational. The other thing I wanted to say is that one of the things that one of the distinctions that I sometimes make in my own mind, and when I talk to my colleagues, is that we serve a lot of folks who are homeless, who do come from a history of poverty. And what we really have seen in the recession, the Great Recession, is a different kind of homelessness, a homelessness that is situational or is hasn't come from generations of poverty. Those folks require very different solutions and very different approaches than people who have been living in poverty for their whole life or are the second or third generation of people. Very different approaches and tools are needed to help those different types of households with their needs to become self-sufficient.
My definition, because you gave this to us beforehand, so I looked up in Wikipedia. It's the transmission of poverty between family members from year to year.
And Scott, do you see that as different from just poverty? Do you make a distinction in your work is what I'm getting at?
Yeah, so the key word here is the word transmission. And what does transmission imply? That's a disease state. So I transmit a disease to somebody else because I cough on it. I transmit my poverty to someone else within my family by my examples, my education, my value of education, my personality, what role model I've done, what economics I leave them. It's an act of actually transmitting a lot of these underlying processes of poverty. If you are a child, so I go to juvie every morning and see all the juvie kids for sick call, and I ask them, what's your family history? Well, my dad's a drug addict. Do you think that's a bad thing? I don't know any better. So these things are transmitted. They're not just, woe is me, I'm accepting them. And there are things you can do to raise your resilience. These are all good words. And so I think it's an act of transmitting poverty from family member to family member. Some family members will say, no, I will not.
I just want to point out the doctor with the research background looks things up in Wikipedia.
And the police chief is a conservative socialist.
I richly deserve that. I would describe it, and it's anecdotal, but it's consistent. If you talk to one of our officers, they'll say it's when they go to the call and grandma is 30 and she's taking care of the baby, and as they drive away they say that kid has no chance. And it's just, that's become the norm, which is sort of what you just said.
Wow. When I'm out in the community talking to folks, I go from the vantage point of, what is your worldview? If you're like 7 or 8 years old and you're living in one couch for a few days, and then maybe you're lucky enough to stay for a place for another month, but then you get evicted, and then you're on the street, and all this while you're trying to go to school. What's your worldview? Are you thinking about college? Are you thinking about joining the basketball team or getting in the debate club or any of that kind of stuff? Your worldview is completely different. It's survival. Your worldview is, what am I going to have for dinner tonight? Your worldview is there a blanket or a coat that I can have? And so one thing we all have in common, I would suspect in this room, is we all have a set of keys in our pocket or our purse. And we get to go home, and we get to open that door, and we get to shut it behind us. What is the worldview for a kid who doesn't have that? What is the worldview there? And to me, that is the transmission aspect of intergenerational poverty.
That was another ad too. That was a great ad.
So we don't talk a lot about poverty at the Housing Authority. We talk about helping people become economically self-sufficient. And so when I got the questions, the preview about, what's our definition of intergenerational poverty, or my definition of intergenerational poverty, that was something I really hadn't thought about, because we're just trying to house people. And so I think that is something we need to think more about in terms of how do we ensure that the people who are residents today in our public housing, that the children of those residents don't become public housing residents themselves.
Some of you kept that to a minute. Oh, good job. Thanks, guys. Okay, any other questions from the crowd? Yeah.
I do have one. I can use my voice. I'd like to circle back to where the chief started. Part of the simplistic approach to this, but the reality is about revenue. It's about the political process. It's about engagement. It's about voter education and registration. It's about being a part of a community that is willing to change. And I'd like to know a little more about how we can engage politically in this process. I'd love to ask the people in this room how many people have called Olympia this week about the housing issue.
Just raise your hands up high.
Higher.
Raise them up there high.
Okay, there's a handful. This is something we've been asked to do this week, And part of the response is, well, I can't really take a political position because I work for a government. I can't really be an activist or send an email because of where the money for my program comes from. I'm sorry, but we are all voters. Thank you.
Someone want to tackle that question?
Give the phone number of where to call. I have it.
Why don't you tell us?
So there's a bill in.
Can you put a mic in front of you?
Sorry. Only because you brought this up. There's a bill in Olympia that would preserve funding for homeless programs, and without this bill passing, we are going to lose 20% of our funding for homeless programs next year, and then we'll be losing 70% in three years. And so we are hoping to get the Senate to pass this bill like today or tomorrow before the session ends. And if you would like to call your legislators and let them know how important it is, your senators, that important it is that they pass this bill, you can call 1-800-562-6000.
What's the bill?
2368. Bill number 2368.
Okay, but there was a question in there, I think. Yeah?
Well, it's a timeless question of mobilization.
Right. Does anyone want to give us a
Yeah.
quick answer to that one?
I'll give you a quick answer. So most of my family's from Sweden, and over in Sweden, I was talking to them about immunizations, and I was saying, well, would you not immunize your kid? And my whole family just jaw dropped and said, why would we not immunize our kids? It's the best thing for the community. And it's not the issue about immunization here, it's about that society thinks of the community first. And then it just hit me like a ton of bricks. How are we going to change the United States to stop thinking about what's best for me, my family, or I don't even think people think beyond their neighborhood, to be honest. And I realized I don't think it's going to be easy to change the mindset of the West Coast in particular to think of community first. And I think, Barb, that's what needs to happen. If we could even define a community in this county. Bainbridge Island does not recognize it's part of Kitsap County. Just kidding. I looked it up on Wikipedia. The point, I live on Bainbridge, so I can trash it. And you know this, we worked hard to try and get a sense of community in this county around healthcare or social services, etc. And I think that's one of the biggest stumbling blocks is to get this county, I have broken my neck, that's why I look this way, guys, just kidding. I think there's this lack of us as a society, and specifically in this county, even defining what is important to us. And until we do that, I think it's going to be very hard to advocate for something. You go back to Sweden, who says, why would we do that crazy thing? It's not good for the community. I have never heard that in my service.
Okay, Ronnie, I had put you off. Do you still have a question? No. Okay, back here. Someone has the mic.
Number one, could you repeat that phone number, the 1-800 number again?
I guess I'll do that. The number is 1-800-562-6000.
Good. Okay, I have a couple questions. Number one, what is available in our community for single males?
Just in total or in regard to any specific kind of issue? Are you available?
I did, I'm stepping that way. All my bootstraps. No, what kind of housing and resources are available for just homeless single males?
Okay.
So Chris from Benedict House is here. The Benedict House Men's Shelter is a great resource for single men. Not only do they provide shelter, but they also work with them to try and move on out of shelter with job training and mentoring and that kind of thing. Kitsap Rescue Mission, an amazing organization in our community that has a 2-year housing program that works on moving somebody out of maybe an addictive state or somebody who's really in crisis to ultimately, after 2 years, hopefully move on to a place of self-sufficiency. They also do a lot of just straight work outreach in the community with single men. Younger single men, Coffee Oasis, with their shelter in our community also does some amazing work. So from a shelter perspective, there's limitations. Sometimes there's not enough. But more and more these days, we're able to get our single men into one of those shelters.
Okay, thank you. I know that the beds are limited at Benedict House, and I'm aware of Coffee Oasis, but thank you for sharing that. Secondly, as a result of today, what kind of ad can we collectively do together? I don't care if it's a billboard by the main street or downtown, with a nice ad to let people know that they do have a choice, and how we can advocate for that. How many of you would be willing to be a mentor for a family or for a child? I mean, that's a lot of people in this room.
Any of you have some marketing departments you want to punt that one to? Anyone want to answer that?
My response is sure. Who's going to lead it? I'll be there. And then it becomes silent.
I kind of like living life on the edge, call, and then have a central agency. Start directing.
Well, in the next section today, we're going to break into small groups, and part of what you'll be discussing is what you think the most important current or new programs are that we could do. Programs, work, activities that we should do here in our community. So I hope you bring that up in your group. And maybe your group can talk about that.
Wasn't there a survey sent out about what we think for priorities in our community?
Can you ask that again?
I know I had received a survey, I don't know, a Survey Monkey or something. They asked questions about money and what were the top priorities. And I know I had chose a few on there, you know, from mental health to working with kids and drug addiction. I truly believe in teen drug court and adult drug court. I don't know how many people received that. And if this is in the response, this next session to that?
It's not. Kathy, we didn't send out a survey, did we? No. Does anyone know what survey she's talking about?
Yeah, I think you're talking in either of two surveys. There was one, if it was recent, it was probably the Behavioral Health Alliance sent out. There's an RFP for drug and alcohol treatment, and they were trying to get a classification of what are your top interests. And a lot of those questions are the same. That came from the county. That's one. Or the other one was a thing called the Kitsap Community Health Priorities questionnaire that went out. This is about a couple of years ago, though. If it was recent, it was the Behavioral Health Alliance. If it was a couple of years ago, it was the KCHIP, or Community Health Priorities questionnaire.
Okay, I'm going to ask the last question because it's just about 2 o'clock. Let's try to do this one quickly again. And like all these questions, there's not a right or wrong answer, and this is one they had on their list, so I hope you all thought about it. And this relates to what I'm about to talk about next, this $1 million project that some of us are about to launch in this community to help alleviate poverty. So, I would like to know from each of you, if you had $1 million to spend over 4 years on alleviating poverty or intergenerational poverty in our community, what would you do with the money? And I'm going to start with Scott.
If I had $1 to spend, I would educate a mother. Period. This is a very clear international health principle. If you had $1 to spend, you would not buy a doctor, you would educate the mother. Okay, so what I mean by this, you gave me $1 million instead of $1. I'm going to use $1 million to do home visitation programs for women. And any woman, I don't care if she's in poverty or not, or it's her first or second baby or not, we're going to have her a mentor, self-advocate for herself and her kids, hopefully for her partner, and raise kids with resilience.
Yeah, let's come on down this way.
I'll be brief. I would, as I mentioned earlier, I would, and again, it's from my perspective, but I would focus $1 million on when those families get into something that it could be a speeding ticket, it could be a DUI, it could be a domestic violence arrest that will cause the entire group to spin out of control financially, that we somehow find a way to hold the person responsible legally, to bring justice without having them spin out of control financially. And I hope if I have 20 more seconds, I wanted to go back to a couple of the last questions because I hope this is okay for me to say. Full disclosure, I was once an elected official with an R by my name. I was endorsed by the R's when I ran for sheriff in King County. But I mention this because it's like guns. Whenever we talked about guns, we would just shout past each other. There's no room for thoughtful conversation. And this subject you're talking about, support for housing, support for families, is really easy to become political fodder for people to shout at each other about. And well, that's just more of the human services complex grabbing more money, and they just want money. When's enough? It's never enough. It becomes really easy to attack. And I would put it this way, and I say this to people often, removing impediments, removing obstructions from letting people fulfill their, have opportunities to fulfill their, what's the word I'm looking for?
Potential.
Their purpose, their potential. That's the essence of conservatism. The essence of conservatism is to let people fulfill their potential, and we should be very busily removing the things that keep them from doing that. That's the essence, and that gets us to one place in the middle where we can all agree, let people thrive on their merit, which everyone agrees on, and everything we've talked about today helps them to do that. So I think that hopefully will help us have that conversation in a less political way. Thank you.
So you said a couple of questions. Was that it? Something else you wanted to add?
No, that's it.
That's it. Monica?
So I personally think one of the most important things we can do is invest in programs that tie employment to helping individuals move off public assistance and also move out of shelters. Getting people employed, not everybody is employable. But there are a lot of people that are employable, and getting them connected with job skills, getting them connected with community businesses that are willing to partner with local nonprofits, partnering with DSHS. There's a new program called Ending Family Homelessness, which is a partnership between employment, housing, and DSHS, is exactly the type of model I think we should be going towards.
Julie?
I honestly didn't come up with a single program. It's multiple things, and.
How about 3?
So, so eviction and foreclosure prevention, because it's so much less expensive. Education, I think we just can never spend too much money educating the youth, and access to dental care for adults who are poor and don't have insurance.
You said dental care, yeah? Let's go to Larry.
There's a best practice social work model called family development. And over the years, different ways of looking at this, I think it has great merit. But it's real basic, and that is you have a person that works, that's a case manager, a counselor, however you describe that works with families, helps to develop a relationship with them, a trusting relationship, then helps them identify mutually determined goals, helps them connect with the resources, and then follows up with them and is their resource person. And I think that model, connected, and then having adequate supportive services funding so that things that people need can be acquired, and maybe rental assistance, maybe mental health counseling, maybe transportation, a number of things. That kind of approach, I think, is really important. And that's where I would invest money in. Because I think having that trusting relationship, having the coaching, the